When the only difference between a funeral and a meal is your ideology, the morally bankrupt are immune to starvation. But what if your taste for human flesh comes with a genetic handicap of pacifism? That is why today we're taking a group of sociopathic hippies to answer one simple question. What is the nutritional value of pacifism? You see, RimWorld treats spontaneous combustion as a form of currency. It's a place where, with the right amount of lead, a gang of chemically challenged pirates can subtly transform into an appetizing dinner. So, playing without violence is like driving home after 2 bottles of tequila. It's not going to be pretty, but we'll get there. Our goal is to build a society where sustenance and self-defense are outsourced strictly to the environment or personal negligence. This puts us in an interesting situation. We need a human flesh to survive, but we're not able to acquire it willingly. To solve this problem, first let's take a look at our colonists. We have Melis, a civil servant, a 41-year-old low-wage worker, Sir Grunt, and his 22-year-old mother, Nicole. Just your 3 average colonists with big dreams and 50 kilos of human meat. What do we lack in any form of self-preservation? We compensate with the ability to excavate industrial amounts of dirt at an alarming speed. Since we are surrounded by factions that want to turn us into a Victorian-era furniture, I made a decision to invest all our steel into a massive wall, then dug a narrow tunnel into adjacent cave system. Why? Well, besides horrifying the occasional vagrant, this lets us indiscriminately gaslight every visitor into mistaking it for our front door. For example, to this day we have no idea who this man was, since he was mauled by a family of giant spiders that live inside this cave. This is great news, because he was made out of food and we successfully achieved a caloric surplus without harming anyone directly. But the real question is, can these spiders handle the difficulty jump from unarmed civilians to a 14-year-old artificial soldiers? Despite suffering from ailments such as a wooden hand and fragile biology, she apparently was an instrument of destruction. So let's see how this goes. Now, instead of fleeing in terror, she chose to alert the hive with the sound of a 26% durability limestone club connecting with the spider's cranium, which resulted in her getting promptly impaled by raptorial blades the size of a human adult. It's probably not the childhood she imagined, but we're grateful to her for this experiment. With that out of the way, we can now prioritize developing our infrastructure, like a wind turbine to power our freezer and store all this extra meat. While the flooring of our bedrooms still consisted primarily of dirt, it seemed appropriate to name the settlement the Vegetarians from Baltimore. Now, I know this all sounds great, but functionally, we remain stuck in the survival stage. If we want to thrive, our concept of pacifism needs to be industrialized. I've identified key components which I believe will elevate our society from the lemonade stand of human limbs to a worldwide franchise. However, we'll need more manual labor first, so I dedicated 2/3 of our workforce to solving the mysteries of cultivating human biology. While effective, the small family of insects were unaware of their new contractual obligations to our colony, and as the cave decorum began leading towards violent expressionism, I noticed one small issue. The hive is dormant and will not reproduce. In simple terms, if they suddenly perish, we're one wooden door away from joining our meat pile. This is concerning because it places the entire labor of our existence on exactly how well these mega spiders can withstand point-blank explosives. Our food situation is not great either. We're going to need a lot more bodies, and I don't mean a group of anemic raiders or even a few orphans in search of medicine, although so far they were the first ones to successfully make it to our front door, which was a feat in itself, considering everyone else so far were relegated to mountain soil. I discovered the glint of hope elevates the flavor, sort of like marinating the meat with spices before a slow roast. To solve our food issue, I constructed a comm relay. This allows us to communicate with other factions. But by now, we performed a few backflips on the evolutionary scale, and our vocabulary consists entirely of loud noises. This greatly upsets anyone we talk to, so they sent over a group to put us down. The more we talk, the more people come to kill us. It makes getting food as trivial as ordering DoorDash. Now we can stack so much human meat that our colonists will uncontrollably vomit from overeating, which, for a cannibal, is a good problem to have. But that also means the sudden shift from a gang of teenagers with broken sticks to armored fire-breathing mutants will be catastrophic for our colony. So we need to replace this hive. I concluded that if we make this environment inhospitable enough, the spiders will simply cease to exist. The issue is, with the amount of decomposing body parts and intestines all over these walls, the bar is already astronomically low. The only solution now is to encase this cave in a steel sarcophagus and turn it into a world's largest oven. So for the next few months, we've mined every piece of rock in search of steel. Eventually, winter came around and I realized we were still wearing the same shirt we crash-landed in, so I used our spare pile of human skin to make some leather clothing. I even constructed a little chapel where we would gather and contemplate our life choices. Amidst all that, I completely failed to consider the most predatory force in RimWorld. These guys possess a supernatural ability to sense hoarded wealth, and after months of indiscriminate cannibalism, even 6 layers of granite could could no longer hide it. Needless to say, this family of spiders didn't stand a chance. Now, personally, the only commodity I was interested in was their former colleagues. As we traded items, they witnessed me slowly drag their dead friends back into my lair, while blocking the doors behind us. I'm not sure if they were upset, but they weren't gunning us down either, so take that for what you will. On an unrelated note, we now have enough food to last through the winter. The bug solution was on its way, but now we're completely defenseless. While I ponder new ways of pacifistic homicide, I put down some steel traps by the entrance and a massive sign that says "Danger Inside." I must admit I'm not a lawyer, but legally I'm pretty sure that's all we're required to do. Unfortunately, this has worked too well, and now the raiders are breaking down our wall. We need to defend ourselves, but the concept of violence is so alien, we instead prioritize discussing the very ideas of our holistic existence. In the meantime, the raiders successfully made their way inside and proceeded to break both of their arms against our generators, then set it on fire and willingly pre-cook themselves before dinner. Normally, this would be a positive outcome, but our house is about 99% lumber, which is currently on fire. Maybe having exploding generators in a strictly wooden shed wasn't the best design choice, so I moved them deeper into the base. The reality is, we're going to need a lot more materials if we want to survive, especially steel, so we better get to work. To address our critical labor shortage, I initiated a mandatory surrogacy program. Melis provided the genetic template, while Sir Grun provided the catalyst. The procedure was clinical, efficient, and deeply uncomfortable for everyone involved, but the result is a new asset whose childhood memories will consist entirely of dark caves and lifting things. Now, we need to make sure they grow up fit for the role, so I enhanced the artificial gestation process with slabs of human meat. While we wait, it's time to prepare the nearby cave for an infestation. And after hours of research on insect biology, I concluded there are three main requirements. First, it needs to be under a mountain. The temperature needs to be above 17 degrees, while the lighting needs to be somewhere around pitch black. Unfortunately, the pollution doesn't contribute to the chances, but it definitely doesn't hurt them either, so it was a great opportunity to boost our power production and the vibe of the entire cave. Now, in all of this Lovecraftian existence, it's easy to lose sight of a true cannibal values. For example, if the deranged group of lunatics will see a helpless child, they'll probably think, I want to eat that. But we look at the same child and see long hours of dragging corpses into our kitchen. We are not the same. The issue is, this runaway doesn't really understand the intrinsic values of cannibalism yet, but he's also 3 years old, which is the perfect stage in brain development for a healthy amount of the indoctrination. Now, with this newfound help, we eventually finalized the cave renovations, and all we had to do now is just wait for the next infestation. This gave me enough time to develop the rest of our colony and reflect on our life choices. Or we would have, because while this raider was on his way to urinate on our walls, he apparently harmed our pet that I wasn't even aware existed. Turns out, wildlife has a tendency to develop a parasocial bond with not being considered as a food group. Unfortunately, whichever cosmic forces wanted it to perish refused to negotiate, because promptly a boomalope went insane, walked into our traps, exploded, and set the bunny on fire. Performing surgery on something that is actively burning was beyond whatever non-existent veterinary skills we had, so it died, which was the exact dose of emotional trauma required to finally convince Grau of our superior dietary choices. Finally, after 10 short days of gestation, a few transport pods worth of internal organs, and a solar flare that almost killed the fetus, the baby was technically born. I say technically because despite being a cannibal and severely malnourished, he is too young to ingest human flesh. So unless we want a baby-shaped meatloaf for dinner, we have to figure out how to feed him. Currently, our only choices are either insect residue or beer. Apparently, cultivating a cannibal inside a vat deprives the child of a certain luxuries, such as a steady source of nutrition. Bug jelly carries a risk of food poisoning, so alcoholism it is. With our population steadily increasing, it was right time to finally upgrade our living situation, and this is going to be expensive. Lucky for us, a trader appeared, so I bought as much steel and components as 2 wagons of human leather could afford. This allowed me to furnish the spider cave, and after enough heaters, to finally spawn an infestation. Now, you're a smart person, so I probably don't have to tell you that having truck-sized bugs endlessly reproducing in our backyard isn't really an ideal design choice. In fact, all of this pollution we refuse to clean up actually makes them stronger and more aggressive. Basically, we have a hive of bugs on steroids that we can't even fight back. The best I could do was build an autocannon. Issue is, due to range constrictions, they are effectively useless. So let's see what happens when we get raided by a competing cannibal faction. While 2 of them went in, got instantly decapitated, the last one decided to flee. The hive proved to be unsurprisingly effective. It was working so well, in fact, that it was already producing even more hives while mauling everyone on sight. However, factions don't really appreciate their envoys getting impaled in dark caves. You see, we exist in an entirely isolated ecosystem. Without advanced components, we are unable to build more complex infrastructure, especially when our very best scientists scientist developed a chemical fascination and, despite her asthma, relaxed by smoking a joint. Out of desperation, I kept sneaking out at night to construct more and more walls, which was slow since the sight of eldritch abominations kept triggering an existential crisis. Each trip required an increasingly larger dose of narcotics to keep the hands steady, and we were starting to run low. Call me paranoid, but the sudden appearance of an orbital drone and systematic psychological warfare felt like a targeted conspiracy. At this point, no amount of drugs could convince Sir Grunt to partake in construction efforts inside this cave. Admittedly, I was more surprised by the fact that somehow a wild horse and a megasloth found refuge inside this cave amongst the megaspiders. The environment we carefully cultivated was finally turning against me. Personally, I was already preparing an escape shuttle, but my colonists decided the best course of action was to run straight at them, which only succeeded in revealing exactly where our door is. Now, all that was standing between life and becoming insect food was a compulsive amount of sandbags. However, while the turrets are useless, electrical components don't take kindly to being stabbed repeatedly. I would like to take credit for this and say this was planned, but also completely obliterated our wall to our generator room. Ultimately, out of the entire hive, only one survived, crawled back into the cave, went into a coma, and expired. If you ask me, I think that went pretty well, but now we somehow have to clean all of this up, so I'll be accepting new volunteers, and this time we're not going to eat them. I'm a Sanderist with 2 intelligence and 0 social isn't a great start, but she's also 2 in mining and 12 in hand-to-hand combat, so maybe she can punch some rocks in a cave. I wish I could say the worst is behind us, but I'm not a liar. You see, the hives are actually still alive, and in a few days we'll start reproducing again. There are 4 hives in total, so I'm going to reapply my original plan and encase each one into a steel sarcophagus. However, instead of heat, I'll be making a localized vacuum via aggressive refrigeration. All we have to do is lower the temperature to a negative 274 degrees. Now, this is highly effective against anyone unfortunate enough to be stuck inside. We just need to make sure we don't accidentally break any walls because the chances of implosion are very real and very catastrophic. Even one infant spider carries a significant lethality risk to people who would lose in a fist fight against a squirrel. Although truth be told, if the spider the size of my head was chasing me in a dark cave, I'd probably run too. Luckily, after witnessing us systematically annihilate each of their families, it decided to run headfirst into a trap and die. With the spider menace truly gone, I deconstructed all of our leftover barricades, which were now in the late stages of decomposition. To avoid self-inflicted terminal diseases and a compulsive cleaning habit, I declared this cave as a forbidden zone to everyone except for Velma. She needs to integrate into our society, and she can do so by hauling resources back into our base. Also, I kind of forgot to build her a bed, so she slept outside in the rain and sometimes inside a freezer. Other than getting into a few violent altercations, it went pretty well. Up until now, we've been living at the mercy of the environment, and with the insects dead, our only options are repairing the wall slightly faster than the raiders could break it, or setting our entrance to the base on fire. This puts us in a war of attrition that we are eventually going to lose. Sensing that, Black Hawk sent us a message, something about diplomatic summit under the pretense of regional stability, and demanded that we make a gesture of goodwill. I responded by insinuating their architecture was reminiscent of some form of primitive civilization, so now they're on their way to kill us. This is good news, because what they didn't know is that I also insulted 2 other factions, and now all of them were converging on our wall, where they will have to fight each other for the right to kill us. But then I realized the solution to all of our problems has been staring right into my face this whole time. So I started sending insults to everyone around us, and by the end we had about 16 different factions coming to kill us. Now, before this showdown takes place, another vagrant has appeared, a nude botanist incapable of violence or cooking, but he's also a misogynist, so he's obviously well suited for Velma, and maybe they can balance each other out. However, he didn't take too kindly to being forced into our new ideology and our dietary restrictions, which can be a turbulent experience for someone unfamiliar with our values. He's going to have to adapt quickly because the war has begun. The first attacker seems to be a hybrid between a burly man and some type of wild animal, against a trio of low-wage workers with no combat experience but 2 full belts of grenades. Personally, my money's on the workers. One of them immediately got their neck snapped, which is not a great start. Now, witnessing this take place in front of him, the second one wasted no time and started to flee, right after lobbing a nade on top of his last teammate. Now, after inhaling a generous dose of toxic fumes, the furry managed to chase down the last one and ripped his head off as well. Now, while all of this was taking place, we wasted no time and started repairing our walls. But the gang war was beginning to intensify, as 4 more raiders appeared and riddled him with arrows. It kind of resembled a surprise birthday party, if the party was filled with increasingly drunk, violent degenerates trying to kill each other. To some, this might seem excessive, but by RimWorld standards, this was Tuesday. It wasn't long until the exchange completely devolved into a combination of tribal spear throwing competition and a vomit of literal flames, which I'm sure was horrifying, but it looked pretty damn cool from the top of our wall. Now, with so many bodies, our steel wall actively burning, and seemingly endless amount of raiders, we had no choice but to call for reinforcements, so I insulted more factions. This final showdown took place between some type of pigman mafia and a tribe of mutated berserkers on steroids. However, all the extra chromosomes don't really do much against assault rifles, so eventually the pigmen won. Then after bashing our wall for a few hours, they got bored and decided to leave. I can't see how many raiders attacked us, but we woke up to about 54 bodies in our backyard, along with a few survivors whose current medical condition reads like an ancient scroll. We attempted to save the berserker chief first, as I like the idea of having a colonist who can spit fire, but unfortunately our healthcare doesn't really cover missing organs and he eventually bled out. However, we did manage to save one woman, who also happened to be a cannibal. This means she's already halfway to acquiring a full citizenship in our colony, but she'll have to go through a rigorous rehabilitation program first, so before we set this up, I put her in one of our rebranded generator rooms where she can receive occasional medical attention and a few slabs of meat to stay alive, if you don't mind eating off the floor and getting food poisoning occasionally. Now, the greatest challenge so far is carrying all these bodies back home before the process of decomposition can begin. The amount of raider gear and items we had on the kitchen floor was overflowing to the point where we couldn't even close the doors to our freezer. Luckily, a group of traders were passing by, and after witnessing what must have resembled a World War III levels of massacred corpses everywhere, they offered us a trade, whilst watching us cartwheel bodies back into our base. Sure, we'll take your wares. In exchange, you can have whatever you find on these bodies. Just don't ask us what happened. Now, you might be asking, is this really what it takes to survive as a society of cannibalistic pacifists? Are we going to have a world war every time we get the rumblies? Well, yes. Mostly. You see, being incapable of violence also comes with a genetic condition of being paranoid. So, I've also cultivated hundreds of rats. In case someone does manage to break in, they have to sway through a literal vermintide to get to our front door. Now, is this moral? Probably not, but it is technically illegal. Now, that should take care of our defenses, but for our ideology, anyone fortunate enough to survive being eaten alive will be put into our rehabilitation facility for intensive care. However, the space is limited, so you better pray you die closer to our walls. We have a single bed with 7 floodlights pointing directly at it, but if the quality sleep isn't motivating enough, we also have a room with a comm relay. You are free to use it, of course. Better yet, as soon as you can convince anyone to come and save you, you get to live. There's only one small issue. This relay is not connected to our power grid, which means nobody can actually hear you scream. This should slowly wither away any remaining willpower for some of our more resilient patients, and I can already feel our colony growing in size. Well, fellas, there you have it. With a few bugs, social engineering, and moral mental gymnastics, we managed to turn this seemingly pacifist cannibal colony into a group of legally violent sociopaths. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.